Forget Marvel's Black Widow. The reality of a female Soviet spy during the Cold War had zero glamour. It was a nightmare of psychological manipulation, brutal sexism, and constant paranoia, where they were seen as nothing but disposable tools. Number 10. The Sparrow training, which was nothing like Hogwarts. The hook? You weren't being trained to be a Marvel superhero. You were being trained to be the most ruthless and disposable psychological weapon in the Soviet arsenal. Forget the scenes from Top Gun or The Matrix with elite combat training, insane martial arts, or kung fu downloads straight to the brain. The notorious Sparrow schools, as seen, in a still glamorized way, in the movie Red Sparrow with Jennifer Lawrence, weren't about disarming a bomb while flying a jet. They were universities of psychological cruelty, agents, often recruited very young, sometimes even from orphanages, were systematically stripped of their identity. They spent years learning not how to fight, but how to seduce, lie, exploit, and psychologically break their targets. They learned to identify a man's weakness, his loneliness, his ego, his vices, and to transform themselves into the perfect fulfillment of that void. Think of it like the DARE. Program I only instead of saying no to drugs. They taught yes to using sex, blackmail, emotional manipulation, and absolutely any dirty tactic to get state secrets. They learned to fake love with the intensity of a Hollywood romance, all while feeling profound disgust. It was less about physical strength and more about making some lonely Pentagon bureaucrat feel special, like he just won the love lottery. The level of manipulation would make Mean Girls look like a kindergarten movie. The takeaway: the training wasn't to empower you or turn you into a girl boss. It was to break you down and rebuild you as a living tool, a weapon that bleeds, designed specifically to exploit human weakness. Number 9. 24/7 paranoia. Truman Show on steroids level. You think you get anxious when your boss sends you a Slack message saying, "We need to talk"? Try living 24/7 knowing that literally anyone could be an informant. The paranoia wasn't just about the obvious enemy, the CIA, MI6. The most intense paranoia, the kind that really eats you from the inside out, was for your own colleagues, your neighbors, the guy who sold you bread, and especially your superiors in the KGB. The Soviet Union, and especially its satellites like East Germany with the Stasi, ran on mutual distrust. One false step, one wrong word to the wrong person, a bad joke about Stalin's mustache or whoever was in charge, and you weren't just fired, you disappeared. Imagine living your entire life like you're in the Truman Show, but instead of Ed Harris just watching you for a TV show, he's actively waiting for you to make one mistake so he can send you to a gulag in Siberia. You can't trust your agency-assigned husband, your children, if you had them, not even your own reflection. You check your breakfast cereal for microphones. You assume the stray cat meowing at your window is a KGB agent with a camera. It's like having your phone on airplane mode permanently, but for your entire social and emotional life. The McCarthy era in the US, with its communist witch hunt, looked like a chill garden party in comparison. Number 8. The glass ceiling was made of reinforced concrete. Thought the USSR was a paradise of gender equality because they put Valentina Tereshkova in space. Sarcastic, over-the-top laugh. Try being a female spy in the KGB. Despite all the communist equality propaganda, the KGB was as sexist as any 1950s old boys club on Wall Street or an episode of Mad Men. Women rarely, if ever, reached command positions. They weren't the strategists. They weren't the M from 07 deciding the fate of the world. They were the frontline workers, the disposable infantry. They were considered useful for one very specific type of job. We'll get to that next. And, other than that, were seen as emotionally unstable, treacherous, or intellectually inferior. Your performance review wasn't based on your geopolitical analysis, but on your ability to manipulate powerful men. You got the riskiest, dirtiest, least glorious missions. And if you succeeded, the credit usually went to the male handler supervising the operation. It was the equivalent of doing all the work on a group project in college, and the one guy who just showed up at the end to present gets the I. Except, if you failed, the IFE was a bullet to the back of the head or a very convenient car accident. You were Wonder Woman, but the Justice League only ever asked you to distract the villain by being pretty, while the real men decided the strategy in the other room. Number 7. The depressing reality of the honey trap. Let's talk about the main job. In Marvel or 007 movies, the female spy seduces the target in a glamorous Monaco casino, exchanges sultry glances, steals the nuclear launch codes during a tango, and escapes across a glass roof. The reality? It was a long-term, depressing, disgusting, and above all, boring job. The honey trap wasn't about one night of glamour. It was about spending years, maybe a decade, in a completely fake relationship with a lonely, middle-aged, probably very boring, and physically repulsive bureaucrat somewhere like Cleveland, Ohio, or Bonn, West Germany. Imagine the worst Tinder date of your life. Now, imagine you can't just leave. You have to marry that person, have kids with them, and pretend to love their boring hobbies like stamp collecting or talking about golf for a decade. All to maybe get a photo of a mid-level factory floor plan or a contact list. You weren't scaling the Burj Khalifa. You were pretending to laugh at dad jokes and at suburban dinner parties while trying to photograph documents with a brick-sized hidden camera. It was the ultimate catfishing scam, but you were the bait, and the one being emotionally and spiritually drained was you. It was like the movie Groundhog Day, but if Bill Murray was stuck on the world's worst date forever. Number 6. Technology. Think, dollar store spy gear. James Bond had Q with exploding pens, laser watches, and ejector seats. The KGB had, well, sometimes they had good stuff, but often Soviet tech was clunky, primitive, and awkward. Forget laser mics and grain-of-rice-sized gadgets. We're talking about massive, suitcase-sized radio transmitters you had to hide under the floorboards, which probably overheated and smelled like burning plastic. We're talking about cameras that made a loud, mechanical click sound, impossible to disguise. The famous Bulgarian umbrella that fired a tiny ricin pellet was a terrifying exception, but most of the gear was heavy and unreliable. While the CIA was developing U-2 spy planes that flew at the edge of space and the tech that would eventually lead to the internet, you were trying to hack the Pentagon using a 1990s AOL dial-up modem. You're in your D.C. safe house, trying to send a vital message to Moscow, and your radio equipment looks like something from a Radio Shack going out of business sale. It's like trying to run Cyberpunk 2077 on your old Commodore 64. Good luck not getting caught by a CIA bug sweep that was using cutting-edge tech. Number 5, imposter syndrome, literally. Many of these agents were illegals. They lived under completely fabricated identities in the US or Europe with no diplomatic cover. They weren't just pretending. They became the person. This isn't just acting like Meryl Streep. It's erasing who you are. After 10 or 15 years of pretending to be Brenda, the Ohio housewife who bakes apple pies and goes to high school football games, the line between you and your persona starts to blur. You have fake friends, a fake family, and an entire fake life. The TV show The Americans, a perfect reference, nailed the psychological cost of this. Imagine having 50 browser tabs open in your brain at all times. One for your real Russian identity, one for your fake American identity, one for your mission details, one for the lies you told your husband, one for the lies you told your son. Eventually, the system crashes. What happens when you start to like your fake life? When you realize you prefer shopping at a Piggly Wiggly in Texas to standing in bread lines in Moscow? The real you becomes the imposter. Many agents reported complete nervous breakdowns, no longer knowing who they were or what they were even fighting for. Number 4, the pay was basically patriotism and coercion. You're risking your life, your sanity, and your soul. You're committing treason against a nuclear superpower. You're seducing men who disgust you. You must be making bank, right? A Manhattan apartment, a sports car? Wrong. Exaggerated, painful laughter. You weren't getting paid in millions of dollars. You were getting paid a Soviet civil servant's salary, which could barely buy a decent pair of jeans on the black market. You lived in a tiny gray apartment in Moscow when you were home, and if you were abroad, your budget was strictly controlled by the bureaucracy. You're pulling off the Ocean's 11 heist, risking it all against the Bellagio, the West. But your cut of the vault is a high five from your KGB handler. While the CIA agent you were trying to seduce was driving a Ford Mustang and living the American dream, you were counting your pennies. There was no performance bonus, no 401k, no dental plan. The payment was the promise that you were serving the motherland. Good luck paying your rent with that. Often, the motivation wasn't even patriotism, it was blackmail. The KGB had something on your family and you were trapped. Number 3, you were 100% disposable. This is a crucial point Hollywood never shows. In the movies, if the hero is captured, the agency moves heaven and earth to rescue them. Think Saving Private Ryan or any Star Wars movie. We're going back for him. The whole team risks it all for family. In the KGB, if you were caught, you didn't exist. Period. They wouldn't negotiate for you. They wouldn't send a rescue team. They would publicly deny they ever knew you, brand your file as traitor. Even if you weren't, it was just easier, and let you rot in prison or be executed. You were a tool. When a screwdriver breaks, you don't mourn it. You throw it in the junk drawer and get another one. You weren't even the red shirt from Star Trek who dies on the planet. You were the styrofoam cup Captain Kirk drank from before beaming down. You were a number in a file, and when you were caught, someone in Moscow just drew a red line through your name and said, "Next." The final, coldest betrayal didn't come from the enemy. It came from your own bosses. Number 2, if you were caught, there was no defense attorney. Getting caught didn't mean a fair trial with a slick lawyer in a suit, like on Law & Order. In the US, if you were caught, like the Rosenbergs, who were executed for espionage, you at least got a trial. It was a Cold War trial, sure, full of hysteria, but there was a process. If you were caught by a rival agency in a less friendly country, or worse, if you were called back to Moscow on suspicion of disloyalty, there was no, "I want my lawyer." It meant interrogation. And Cold War interrogation methods, on all sides, were not a friendly chat over coffee and donuts. It wasn't Jack Bauer on 24 getting the truth in 5 minutes by yelling. It was slow, grinding psychological and physical torture designed to break your mind. You would talk, everyone talked. And afterward, best case scenario, life in a forgotten prison. Worst case, a quiet execution and an unmarked grave. The risk wasn't getting deported. The risk was total annihilation of your existence. Number 1, there was no happy ending. And the number 1 reason it sucked to be a Soviet spy. There was no retirement plan. There was no victorious endgame. You didn't win the Cold War and retire to a beach house in Miami or the Crimea. There was no getting out. If you were incredibly successful, survived everything, and completed your missions, what did you win? A lifetime of looking over your shoulder. If you returned to the USSR, you knew too much. You had lived in the West. You were contaminated by capitalist ideas. You were a threat. During Stalin's purges, and even after, the most successful spies were often the first to be executed by their own bosses. A paranoid regime fears those who know where the bodies are buried more than anyone. Your best-case scenario was living out your life in a gray apartment, terrified of every knock on the door, knowing your only prize for a lifetime of service and sacrifice was to be considered a suspect by the very system you served. It's like the ending of The Sopranos, that abrupt cut to black, but every single day, you're not waiting to see if it will happen. You're just waiting for when.